Welcome back to this week's episode of the Seatown Podcast, where Seattle business owners, entrepreneurs, and community leaders are invited on to share their stories with us. If you've been listening to this podcast, you already know that the reason I started it was to help support the community by sharing the stories of local businesses and community leaders, especially West Seattle, since this is where I live, it's where I work. I already have some great relationships with some of the business owners in this area. But as we're heading into the holiday season here in December, I really wanted to highlight some of the great local nonprofit groups that are doing some really great work. And so that will be our focus in December. Hopefully these episodes featuring the nonprofit groups will help to make an impression and encourage listeners to get involved in one of these organizations to help those in our community that may not be experiencing the same blessings that we are this Christmas season. I think that together we can make an even larger impact for the community and the individuals that these nonprofit organizations serve. Today I'm joined by Amanda Hightower, the Executive Director of Real Escape from the Sex Trade, or REST, which is a Seattle-based nonprofit group. Thanks for joining me today, Amanda.
Yeah, great to be here.
Would you mind just giving our listeners a little bit of a background on what REST is, what they do, what their mission is?
Yeah, definitely. Well, our mission is to provide pathways to freedom, safety, and hope for victims of sex trafficking or people involved in the sex trade. So we're a faith-based nonprofit in Seattle that is doing direct services, really providing opportunities for people who have been trafficked in the sex trade locally or around the country to have a place where they can escape the sex trade and start to rebuild their life and pursue their goals.
Okay. Now, I know myself up until a couple years ago didn't even realize that sex trafficking was an issue, especially in Seattle.
Yeah.
What do you say when people are like, I had no idea that was a thing? How did you learn about it? How did you get into this?
Well, yeah, I think it's actually pretty common that people assume trafficking is something that happens kind of in foreign countries or people moving people from one country to another, and whether it's in labor trafficking or in the sex trade. But it is happening locally too. Like there's anywhere from 300 to 500 youth who are being trafficked in the sex trade in Seattle on any given night. Likely up to maybe 3,000 or more adults who are trafficked in the sex industry locally. I learned about it back in 2007. I was working with homeless youth and young adults, and one of the services that we did was street outreach, and we were specifically working with sexually exploited young women up on North Aurora. And I didn't really know about the dynamics of prostitution or the sex trade. And as I started to get to know some of the women who were involved in prostitution, I realized that the barriers were so significant for them to be able to exit the sex trade that everyone that I talked to wanted out but didn't feel like they had the opportunities to get out of the sex trade. That oftentimes there was a trafficker or pimp involved that was keeping them emotionally bound or even physically kind of forced to stay in. And I felt then like we needed to do something different than what we were doing just for kind of generally homeless youth or folks who are experiencing drug addiction, to be able to provide better opportunities for them to exit the sex trade.
Sure. So, with having kind of discovered that in, what you said, 2007?
Yeah.
What were the steps and what kind of led you from awareness to actually, now you founded REST, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so what led you from there to starting an organization and moving forward?
Yeah, so it was about a year after that, kind of doing that work with homeless youth and young adults, where I decided that I really wanted to intentionally focus on this issue in particular. I was living in East King County at the time, and so I moved downtown Seattle and got connected with a local church that had a little bit more of kind of a mercy and social justice vibe to it. Approached some folks in the church about potentially doing some outreach to women involved in prostitution, and it took a little while to get things together, but in 2009 we had an interest meeting for anybody that was really curious about this or considering getting involved in this kind of work. And we decided to start with doing direct outreach on the streets, into strip clubs, and to bikini barista stands. And really our aim was just to build relationships with women in the sex trade, find out what their needs were, see if we could build trust with them and help them connect to resources. And as we got to know the women and listen to what their needs were and help them connect to resources, we were also figuring out what resources worked and didn't work, and what resources were missing. And we were committed to building those resources or filling the gaps in services if something didn't exist. And that, relationally based, community based, and filling in the needs kind of mission is what drove all of our growth kind of from the beginning until now.
Okay.
That's kind of how we got started.
Huh. Now you're used to go to Mars Hill, right? I mean, what's...
Yeah. We actually, Rest was started out of Mars Hill.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mars Hill downtown. I actually started at Ballard and then was at the Bellevue campus and then downtown.
Sure.
I was on staff for a while.
Us, so.
Yep.
Interesting. So I mean, in 2009, it sounds like there was a lot of learning as you went, just trying to develop those relationships with women that may be in need.
Yeah.
So I mean, what did that kind of look like? You started that, you're going out, developing those relationships, seeing what they needed, what they, where the needs were. I mean, how did it kind of grow and change from there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think a big part in the beginning was just being a consistent presence and following through with what we said we were going to do and showing up, whether if it was street outreach, showing up every Friday night and being where we said we were going to be, and responding when folks would start to ask for help, and intentionally trying to meet with people kind of outside of the sex trade where we could maybe talk a little bit more freely or have space to kind of to get to know them more and understand what are their individual needs. And then as we got to know more and more of them, what are some collective needs that seem to be pretty common that aren't being met? And, one of the probably early needs that came out frequently was the need for a safe place to go, safe shelter, housing, beds. And we were also learning that because of the layers and layers of trauma that comes from being in the sex trade, and, the majority of folks who are involved in the sex trade also have a history of abuse before they were exploited. Yeah. So there's just so much trauma that's been compounded over the years that makes it hard to adapt to mainstream services or services that don't really accommodate for what that trauma recovery looks like. So we just knew that we needed to figure out a way to provide safe places for women to go to where they could recover, ride the up and down wave of that recovery, be welcomed even if they left, be welcomed back, because we know it takes a long time to recover. And we didn't have those spaces figured out when we first started, of course, and we were trying to figure out where those spaces existed or if we needed to build them. So it was a lot of learning about that and trying out different services in the community to see what would work and what wasn't working. And really inviting the women that we were working with to inform us, of what they needed and, what was working for them and what wasn't. And I think there's kind of combined with that, we're doing the work and building the relationships. We're also doing a ton of research on the side around brain development and trauma and mental illness and addiction, and how can we provide the best quality of care. It's not just good intention, like that we want to, build relationships, but we need to know how to do it well in a way that's actually going to be effective. Sure.
As you're getting to know those ladies and hear their needs, did you find that there was already resources for those needs? You just had to connect them, or did you guys have to develop some of that yourselves or partner with other organizations, or what happened there?
Yeah, it depended on the need. There were some needs that we could get into right away. If it was medical support and services, we had some good providers that we could do quick walk-ins, same-day walk-ins for women that we were working with to access care right away that seemed to work really well. There was some organizations that were doing kind of day services, drop-in services for women that seemed to be working well. We did have a hard time finding shelter beds that worked well. I think whether it was too much structure, no structure, or too many people in one space, not a real sense of kind of privacy or safety. All of those things mixed with the trauma response led to there not really being a lot of effective shelter beds for the women that we were working with. So we would help somebody get placed in a shelter, and then usually they would leave within a day or 2 days because of something related to the environment. And so we knew we needed to figure out a way to make a shelter space work, for these women.
Did you guys find a solution to that, or?
It took a while. We opened our residential program. It's a 6-bed residential program. We opened in 2012. And it's a longer term residential program, so a year. They can stay for up to a year. And we started small with just 2 beds, and then we expanded to 6 beds. Okay. And the first year went well. It seemed like the program model was working well to accommodate for this kind of trauma recovery process. I think it's the thing to note about it is that when you've experienced years and years and years of trauma, your brain kind of gets stuck in fight or flight mode.
Sure.
So the littlest thing, even if it's not a danger, your brain might think it's a danger, so they respond with fighting or running away.
Sure, it's a much bigger deal than it would be in regular
So it's not just like you provide a bed and they'll come and they'll stay and they'll be so grateful and everything is, good from there. And so providing a semi-structured place with individual rooms and, just kind of responding to the things that we had heard from them over the years about what was working, what was not working, helped to us to be able to build a program that was more effective than what we were finding in other places. But the problem remained that we didn't have an emergency place. So this is a long-term place, but we couldn't do emergency placements in the same place because it destabilizes the whole environment. So we still had this big need until recently of emergency beds.
Okay.
And just last month, we opened our emergency receiving center, which is the emergency shelter with 7 individual bedrooms where women can come into immediately and stay for a short term while they're kind of stabilizing and then preparing to move on to the next step.
Sure. Now, the more long-term 6-room option, is that kind of similar program as like the Renovo House, where they take people who've been through like the UGM program and it provides a place for them to stay as they get on their feet and learn life skills and that sort of thing?
It might be a mix of the two, or in between. It's not really graduated housing. It's for 18 to 24-year-olds, and they might be just recently stabilized. They might be coming from a short-term shelter into our house, or they might even be coming from scenario in which they are temporarily staying with family until they get into the shelter, like they've left a trafficker or been able to escape a trafficker and are kind of waiting to get in. So they might still be at kind of the very beginning stages of their recovery and healing journey. And so they don't have classes that they have to attend all day. Instead, they build their kind of individualized program model. So they get to say what's most important to them that they want to work on, whether it's education or getting a job or getting a child back that might be in this system. And we kind of adapt their kind of weekly schedule around what their most important goals are. And that gives them it kind of restores that sense of agency, that sense of empowerment that they get to determine for themselves what they want to do. And I think that helps them want to stay in that space. Whenever you go from years and years of chaos and crisis, it can actually feel really uncomfortable to be in a stable environment. It doesn't feel normal, And so when they get to work on the things that are important to them, it helps them kind of offset that discomfort. And we make sure there's trauma counseling and life skills available, and activities and survivor support groups, those kinds of things.
I guess what is the scope of everything you guys do now, from the outreach to getting someone out of that? I mean, what might that process look like? Yeah,
so we'll just kind of run through a specific case that kind of, I think, captures a lot of what we do. We have partnered with another organization to do text outreach online. So we've moved away from street outreach. We still do some, but not as much, to doing text outreach because most of prostitution has moved from the streets onto the internet. And so on a site where there's all of the ads kind of listed for under personal escorts, where it's people soliciting for prostitution, They usually includes phone numbers. So our partner combs that, uses technology to send out a text to these phone numbers. And we send out, I think, 250 texts a week. And it'll be a message from one of our employees who's also a survivor saying, hi, I used to be in the sex trade for this many years. I'm out now. Now we serve individuals who are trying to get out of the life themselves. Would love to chat if you're interested, if you need anything, And people will start responding with like, yes, this is exactly what I needed, or we got a response one of the recent times that we did it that was from a young woman who said, I've gotten your text before, but I just got away from my pimp. Now I can respond to you. Tell me, like, what do you guys do? And ended up being able to meet with one of our community advocates the next day. So we still do the outreach, but we do it via text outreach. And then we have a team of community advocates who actually work out in the community meeting with women who are trying to get connected to services, but don't necessarily come into our drop-in center or call the hotline. And so they get connected to a community advocate, and the advocate will start to help them get connected to services at rest or to other resources, start to identify what their particular goals are, kind of what they're wanting to do, and help them kind of make a plan towards reaching that. Sometimes it will be like for this gal in particular, she was able to get connected to our drop-in center. We have some support groups, and so she's been attending the support groups and was able to get help getting a job, and she has a safe place to stay. So she's just working on kind of building healthy relationships and going through the healing and recovery journey.
Sure.
For somebody else, it might be they need to actually come into our shelter, stay for a while in their shelter, and then maybe apply to move into our residential program. Or if they need help relocating, it might be somewhere out of state that they that we can help them get to, especially if they have a trafficker in town who might pose a threat of harm to them. I think there's all different ways that folks can get connected to rest and kind of work through the different services that we provide. And the one kind of outlier program that we do is our prevention team, which goes into juvenile detention centers and works with young boys and girls in the justice system who will learn from our team about gender-based violence, and they'll do prevention work with them specifically around exploitation, and really focusing on empowering young boys and girls to work against exploitation instead of just avoiding it.
Sure. How big is REST as far as, employees and volunteers and amount of gals that's able to help, each year, that sort of thing?
That's a good question. Yeah. So we currently have 31 employees, which recently, we were recently at almost half of that because we hadn't opened our shelter yet. So when we opened our shelter and expanded our drop-in services, we significantly increased our staffing. So we have 31 employees and right around 50 volunteers, and we serve anywhere from 80 to 100 women. Occasionally a young man will also come in for services. Sometimes boys and girls too who are under the age of 18 receive case management services. 80 to 100 a month. And total, probably since we've started, we've worked with over 1,400 individuals. We get about 40 hotline calls a month, which could be anyone from someone who is actually in the sex trade who's looking for help, somebody who is with law enforcement trying that maybe they've recovered a victim and would like to bring them into our shelter. It could be another service provider who's making a referral, but it's pretty busy. It's active.
Sounds like it. I mean, what whether it's through the face-to-face interactions or being on the streets, what trends do you guys see in that community as far as the needs of the women or how they respond typically? Yeah,
so the trends, like what their experiences are or what their needs are. Yeah. So I think, so there's a lot of reasons why it helps to kind of back up a little bit one of the primary reasons why somebody gets involved in the sex trade is because of a relationship, an abusive relationship. So older man approaches a younger, vulnerable woman or girl, kind of sells this dream of a fantasy life together, a loving relationship. She actually believes that they're in a romantic relationship, and maybe she's running away from or has run away from an abusive home or dysfunctional family life, or maybe she's in the foster system and doesn't really have roots anywhere, and so feels kind of swept up in this relationship with somebody who is making her feel like she belongs for the first time, that she's seen, that she's loved, that she actually could have all of the things that she hasn't been able to have so far. So she gets kind of swept up into it, and then maybe it's weeks or months down the road where he asks her to prostitute. And it might be something like, hey, I just need you to do this one thing for me, just this one time. And then it becomes every day. Or, look, you're already having sex. Why don't you just get paid for it? We're going to make our dreams come true even faster. So it could be any way that he goes about kind of getting her to engage in a commercial sex act. And because of her attachment to him emotionally, even if she just doesn't want to do it or decides later that she doesn't want to do it, there's such a connection to the idea of that dream someday coming true that she'll stay. And then, it's like a lot of psychological coercion that he uses. He'll use manipulation and shame to kind of keep her in. And that's not always the story. Sometimes it's a family member who's forcing their child to be involved in prostitution. Sometimes it's actual force, like somebody is taken, and forced and kind of drugs are used to kind of keep them kind of in the life. But what we see most commonly is that there's this relationship that has become kind of mixed up into the sex trade and has kind of led somebody into this exploitive experience. And in the same way, it's going to be a relationship that becomes the intervention. So the main need that we see in anyone that we work with is the need for healthy, trusting relationships, a sense of belonging, a sense of community, a sense of having a meaningful purpose with other people again. And as that gets stronger for the women that we work with, there's less of a draw kind of back into a relationship with a trafficker that may still have some hold, on them. So I would say that's probably the biggest need that we see outside of probably, the safe place to stay. And then very significant need is economic sustainability. So the ability to make money, to actually get become employed and have a job and have income and be able to sustain themselves. And can be really hard to do when they feel like, if they feel like this is really the only thing they can do is, be involved in prostitution. And it's hard to make that switch from having hundreds of dollars go through your hands every day. Even if they didn't keep the money, it felt like this was a way to make a lot of money really quickly to, I'm going to apply for a job. I'm going to wait a few weeks to hear back. I'm going to interview, maybe get the job. And if I get the job, I'm, getting paid minimum wage, and someone called the government is taking out taxes. So it feels hard to make that shift. Even if they're more stable now because of it, it doesn't feel as powerful. It doesn't feel as quick to be able to get ahead.
Okay. It sounds like a very heavy, emotionally draining line of work to be in. What keeps you going?
Yeah, good question. It is. It's intense, and we hear devastating stories all of the time. It can be really hard when we're not hearing back from somebody that, we've been in a relationship for a long time, and, worry about, okay, what's happened to her or to them in those situations. So what keeps us going, I think, are those times when we get to walk around and witness evidence of healing and recovery happening. When I walk through our spaces and I hear laughter and bonding, and it's like I get little glimpses of hope being restored. When I hear about our some of the women that we work with getting jobs or getting their first car. It's always this big celebration. I think it's those, we have to take the time to really celebrate each of those steps because it's significant to go through all of the trauma that they've gone through and be able to take these steps towards their own personal independence and self-sufficiency. Yeah. So I think focusing on those victories, those wins are really important. I think digging into our faith is also really important. You know, we're motivated at Rest to do this work out of our faith. And at the same time, we don't want to become the saviors, right? Mm-hmm. So I think digging into my faith for me lets me know that I have a part to play in this, of like bringing opportunities for freedom, safety, and hope, for sharing love and compassion with some of the most vulnerable people in our community. But I'm not the savior. Like, I'm not the one who's going to solve this whole problem. Like, I have a part to play. And so even at the end of the day, when there are still needs to be met and there's still gaps in services that need to be filled, that doesn't mean I need to stay awake all night thinking about that. Like, I can rest in knowing that I'm doing my part, and hopefully we can recruit others to do their part. Yeah. And just kind of rely on that to see it through and keep it going. Yeah.
I mean, speaking of, everyone kind of doing their part. So I've got several friends that regularly participate in the December, events, whatever. What is there any correlation with that? As far as their mission is obviously similar to be helping women get out of the sex trade and bring awareness and stuff.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that a little?
Yeah. Well, I think awareness is so important. Just like you brought up in the beginning, when people think about trafficking, they don't know that it's a problem here, and anything like Dressember helps to raise awareness. People are asking questions when people are wearing a dress all month long. Yeah. Well, what does that mean? What is this about? And so to be able to tie it to specific things that are happening in our community and ways that we can respond to stop them from happening in our community is really important. And we partner with several organizations that do more kind of broad awareness events or strategic awareness events that are help to inform the community. And as the community becomes more aware of what's happening, it kind of mobilizes a voice that says treating women as objects is not okay. And I think the larger culture has said and demonstrating that treating women as objects is okay, whether it's in media or songs or whatever. And so when we get more and more voices saying it's actually not okay, that helps, steer men, I think specifically, away from buying sex, which is a big driver of this problem to begin with. So,
sure. I mean, I guess what does REST do, or I guess what can we do or whatever to kind of raise awareness of the issues? I mean, is there kind of an educational portion of REST, or?
REST we do a quarterly training that community members can come to, learn about the dynamics of sex trafficking, the sex trade, things that they can do to kind of get involved or to help with this cause. I think also, anything from talking to other men about it to talking to children about it, kind of focusing on raising boys and girls to have a voice and to respect kind of the agency and consent of women and to not objectify. I think those are things we can do as individuals, like within the home and in families and within churches, within communities, and in businesses too. I think Businesses Ending Slavery and Trafficking is one of our partners, and they work with business owners to develop an alliance where business owners agree to incorporate certain practices or policies to help their employees become aware of this issue, to not use technology for the purpose of exploitation and those kinds of things. So I think there are ways for individuals, communities, businesses, anyone to kind of get involved and help move this needle.
Sure. What I guess what would that message sound like? I guess specifically, I'm thinking, talking about the larger cultural issues. I seem to I've observed kind of this duplicitous message of it's not okay to objectify women, which is obviously true, and I don't know anyone who'd say, I think it is okay. I don't know anyone who would say that, but at the same time, as a society, we're okay with pornography, which is exactly what that does. I mean, what role does pornography play in the sex trades and stuff? Because generally what I hear is it's not hurting anyone. They're there because they want to be there.
Yeah, pornography plays a huge role in its influence in our culture and the way that particularly men view women. The average age of first viewing porn is 11 for boys. So if someone is starting to view porn at the age of 11, you can guarantee that the influence is going to impact how they engage with women or how they think about sex. And pornography has this progression about it that it might start with something that's a little more softcore, but it progresses pretty quickly into extremely violent sex acts. And so I think the most popular form of pornography is actually pornography in which several men will be doing pretty aggressive sex acts with one woman. And if that is the progression that it gets to, and this is what a young teenage mind or young male mind sees and thinks this is normal or this is expected or this is what women want or this is what men should do, then they expect to live that out in their actual relationships. And when they find that the women that they're engaging with or in relationship with are actually not okay with that, but they still want to play that out, purchasing sex is kind of the next step. So obviously not everybody that views pornography is purchasing sex, but it certainly is an on-ramp to purchasing sex. And, there's an addiction that comes with pornography too. Like their brain is kind of going back to this. Not only do I want to see it again, but I want to see more and I want it to be, more intense, different. And so it just kind of leads to eventually pornography viewing is not enough. That there is this desire to act it out.
Sure.
There are plenty of women who used to be in pornography films who will say very freely about the damage it did by participating in that to them personally and the influence they feel like they have contributed to then.
Sure.
I think in stories we hear of girls that we've worked with and women that we've worked with, the use of pornography to kind of train them into what they needed to do was happening pretty regularly. Even filming some of the girls and women and then selling it as pornography. So I would say absolutely not all of pornography, not all of the videos that people are watching when they're watching porn are between consensual partners, or someone who that's what they would be doing if they had other options. And I think that's part of the conversation that should come up but if you actually had other options, is this what you would choose? Yeah. And that's where agency and choice really becomes important in this societal issue.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of mentioned there's definitely an educational aspect of this, raising awareness. That people know that, it's kind of underground, but it's an issue. Just turning a blind eye isn't good enough. Pretending it's not there.
Yeah.
What are things that the people in the community can do to make a difference or to help? Whether either that's supporting organizations like you guys monetarily or with volunteer work or what does it look best?
Yeah, I think one, being informed. I think coming to a training or an awareness event to learn more about the issue, and then I think everyone has a part to play in some way, whether it's becoming an ambassador in their workplace or in their community to talk about this issue and raise awareness. And we have an ambassador program at REST where we help people kind of get to a place where they feel like they can share about this issue and kind of be informed and give people kind of specific ways that they can also get involved and kind of carry it forward. We have volunteer opportunities at Rest for people to do behind the scenes work or do direct services. There's a pretty thorough vetting process, of course, but those are opportunities. We also have smaller things like in our drop-in center, we do a meal every Monday through Thursday night where folks can bring a meal to provide for the women, a dinner meal. So there's small things, there are larger things. Obviously, financial support for Rest is significant. I mentioned that we grew really quickly, that we have a lot of programs going on, and because of the intensity of the work and the need for staffing support to kind of help people through the pretty serious trauma recovery adventure. It's pretty expensive to do this.
How do you guys typically raise money for supporting the organization?
Yeah, we're all privately funded right now. Lots of foundations involved, incredible individuals giving generously. Churches have been really supportive. And so we just continue to tap on those resources. There's the potential for funding from the city that we're exploring as we've expanded in opening shelter, but mostly individuals.
Okay. Do you guys partner with or do any of the work with similar organizations, or like Triple X Church, which has a whole ministry kind of geared towards this, that sort of thing?
Mm-hmm. We have friendships, I think, with several organizations around the country that are doing similar things. We work pretty closely with many other residential programs that are in operation around the country, some churches that are doing more kind of broad awareness events, but because we're a direct service organization, we kind of focus primarily on providing the direct service, kind of filling those gaps, and don't try to do everything. So we don't do policy lobbying in Washington, but we partner with an organization that does, and we allow our work to inform that agency so they are equipped to do lobbying efforts in Olympia. And so we say this is what we are focusing on, and we don't want to get stretched too thin. And so there's several things we won't kind of take on as our task, but we partner with those organizations that are doing it.
Sure. Makes sense. How can someone find out more about Rest or getting involved?
Yeah, I think we've got an awesome website up. It's at iwantrest.com. That's probably the best way to go online and kind of read about Rest. Coming to our training day, there's information about it on our website too, under the events tab.
Well, Amanda, thank you very much for joining me today, and hopefully this will help raise a little awareness about some of the issues going on in Seattle, and how people can get involved and help make a difference young women's lives.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Well, that wraps up this week's episode of the C-Town Podcast. Make sure to check out our guest website, support what they're doing, and show them some love. If you liked what you heard on this podcast, let us know by writing us a very nice 5-star review on iTunes and subscribing. If you want to hear more episodes or find out more about the podcast, you can go to our website at ctownpodcast.com. That's SEA-townpodcast.com. You can also find out more about me and other projects I'm working on by visiting ctown.com. Today's intro and outro music is courtesy of the Fascination Movement. You can find their albums in the iTunes store. The C-Town Podcast creator and host is Christian Harris. This has been a C-Town Media production.